My name is Melissa Ray. I'm 33, and 2 years ago, at a family dinner, my brother casually said, "You're just playing CEO." He said it with a smile, light-hearted, like it was all in good fun. Everyone laughed. I smiled too. I figured if I didn't show I was hurt, maybe it wouldn't count. I left early that night. The next morning at the office, I increased the outdoor advertising budget. We were launching a campaign for a logistics brand, nothing personal, strictly B2B. 2 months later, their downtown Dallas building was covered in our branding. And my face. When I ran into my father near that same building, his eyes widened. And I think for the first time, he realized I wasn't playing. I was building. Without them. What happened next changed more than just how they saw me. It changed how I saw myself. Before I share what came after that moment, let me know where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to prove your worth in silence. I was never the loud one in the family. Growing up, I learned to listen more than speak, to observe rather than interrupt, and to contribute only when asked if I was asked at all. My brother Ryan, older by 3 years, had the kind of presence that took over a room before he even said a word. He was the golden child, always praised for his discipline, his clear goals, and his natural leadership. My sister Vanessa, 2 years younger, was the nurturer, charming, socially graceful, always knowing what to say at the right time. And then there was me, the quiet one who liked art. My parents weren't cruel. They provided everything we needed: food on the table, a decent home, piano lessons, even though I had no interest in music. But love in our house was measured by how well you fit into a mold. Ryan wanted to be an engineer and built model bridges from the age of 10. Vanessa volunteered at every school event, made handmade cards for relatives, and dreamed of becoming a teacher. I spent hours alone with sketchbooks, drawing logos for imaginary companies, designing make-believe business cards, creating campaigns in my head for products that didn't exist. They called it a phase. In high school, I joined a digital design club. I was the only girl. I created a rebranding concept for the school mascot that went viral within our little world of teenagers. Local parents loved it. The PTA printed it on banners. My mom framed one and hung it near the laundry room, not the living room, not the hallway. When my dad saw it, he nodded once and said, "You've always been good with decoration." College was the first place I felt partially free. I didn't go far, just 2 hours from home, but it was enough to give me space. I majored in marketing with a focus on branding. I fell in love with color psychology, user behavior, and the science behind decision-making. My professors respected me. Some even encouraged me to think bigger. I stayed up nights working on mock campaigns, pitching to local startups, even running small freelance gigs. My family? They asked if I was doing Instagram stuff. After graduation, Ryan was offered a junior director position at a construction firm through one of my dad's contacts. Vanessa got a full scholarship for a master's program in education. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment over a donut shop and started taking small design jobs from Craigslist, Fiverr, and anyone who was willing to give me a chance. I built websites, wrote taglines, designed pitch decks. I was broke, but something about creating something from nothing, making people believe in a brand that had never existed before, kept me going. I lived on microwave noodles and ambition. 2 years in, I had a client who ran a local pet grooming chain. She asked if I could make her look as good as the big guys. I went all in. I redesigned her logo, gave her brand a voice, planned a billboard campaign she never imagined she could afford. Her sales went up 48% in 4 months. She cried when she saw her storefront with the new logo lit up. She hugged me like I had just saved her company. I told my family about it during one of our rare Sunday lunches. My dad chewed his steak slowly and asked, "Is it sustainable?" My brother made a joke about pet shampoo not being a real industry. Vanessa said, "That's so cute, Mel." I realized then that no matter how far I came, to them I was still the one who liked fonts and colors. When I finally registered my agency, Ray Creative, I was nervous to even say it out loud. I had a team of 2 freelancers, no office, and a single monthly retainer client. But I knew this was what I was meant to do. I poured every cent into branding, ironically, my own. The website was perfect, the tagline clear. I built a brand I wish someone had built for me. One night, I emailed my family the launch link. No one responded. Days passed. Then my mom texted, "Nice site, love the green." My dad didn't reply at all. Ryan didn't open it. For them, real business meant desks, buildings, and men in suits. For me, it meant freedom, autonomy, risk. But still deep down, I wanted them to acknowledge it. Just once. I began to distance myself emotionally. I stopped bringing up work at dinners. I answered vaguely when they asked how things were. I showed up for birthdays, holidays, weddings, but never talked about clients, deliverables, or awards. It wasn't bitterness, it was just practicality. Why share something sacred with people who would only diminish it? Then came the moment that recentered everything. I was invited to pitch a campaign for a regional logistics company. They were expanding across Texas and needed to modernize their image. It was the biggest opportunity I'd had. I worked with my team day and night. We won the pitch, the campaign, a People Behind the Progress series, highlighting unseen leadership in unseen industries. The creative director suggested featuring me as one of the faces. I hesitated. But then I remembered the way they laughed, the way my dad's silence felt heavier than insults. I said yes, and I stood there on the day of the photo shoot in a black blazer, clean background, eyes level with the lens, no smile, just presence. When I saw the mock-up, I felt something shift. Not anger, not pride, something more grounded. I was no longer the girl waiting for recognition. I had built something even if they never saw it. That billboard would be up in 2 months, on the very route my father drove to work every weekday. I didn't tell anyone. I just waited. It was a warm Saturday in early May when the family got together to celebrate Ryan's promotion. He'd just been named director of operations at the same construction firm our father had worked for 30 years before retiring. It wasn't just a job to them, it was legacy. Proof that Ryan had followed the blueprint. He had a wife, a mortgage, a golden retriever named Max, and now an executive title. To my family, that was the American dream, done right. The celebration was held at our parents' house, a large 2-story colonial just outside Fort Worth. The backyard was decorated with string lights and blue and white balloons the colors of the company logo. My mom had catered barbecue from Ryan's favorite spot. There was a banner over the patio that read, "Congratulations, Ryan," in thick block letters, and a photo of him in a suit framed next to a table full of gifts. I arrived 10 minutes early, out of habit. I parked across the street and sat in the car for a moment, steadying myself. I hadn't been home in a while. My work had kept me busy, and to be honest, I'd started avoiding family gatherings. They always left me with a strange ache I couldn't explain, a mix of invisibility and quiet resentment. Still, I told myself I'd be polite, smile, stay an hour or two, then leave. When I walked into the backyard, my sister Vanessa greeted me first with her usual cheerful hug. She had that look in her eyes, the one that said, "I'm glad you made it, but also, I didn't expect you to come." My dad was standing near the grill, talking loudly to a group of men in matching polos. I recognized a few as Ryan's colleagues. Mom was inside arranging drinks. Ryan stood in the center, surrounded by people congratulating him. He looked comfortable, confident, entirely at home in this world of promotions and performance reviews. After the initial greetings, I found myself near the food table, trying to make small talk with an uncle I hadn't seen in years. Someone asked what I'd been up to. Before I could answer, Ryan chimed in from across the patio. "Oh, you know Melissa," he said, lifting a beer. "She's still doing her CEO cosplay." There was a brief pause before everyone laughed. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was casual, familiar, like an inside joke they'd all been telling for years. I smiled thinly. I nodded. I said nothing. The conversation moved on without me. My chest felt tight, like I had swallowed something too large. I excused myself and went inside under the pretense of looking for napkins. In the kitchen, I stood alone, hands resting on the edge of the sink, staring out at the backyard through the window. They were all out there laughing, clapping each other on the back, raising glasses. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was just tired of being the footnote. Mom walked in a few minutes later, holding a tray of glasses. She smiled when she saw me and asked if everything was okay. I nodded. She didn't press. She never did. She told me to grab a drink and come back out. I said I would, but I didn't. Instead, I checked my phone. I had 6 new emails. One was from a potential client in Austin, a founder of a wellness brand who had seen our recent campaign. She wanted to schedule a call on Monday. I replied yes and confirmed a time. That message, that simple thread of progress, grounded me. It reminded me who I was outside of this house. When I finally stepped back outside, they were doing speeches. My dad had a microphone and was talking about how proud he was of Ryan, how he was a man of action, someone who gets things done. He raised his glass and said, "Here's to Ryan, a real leader, not one of those online influencers who think owning a website makes them a CEO." Everyone laughed again. This time, louder. I didn't laugh. I stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible as always, and felt something click inside me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hurt. It was a kind of cold clarity. I realized that they weren't going to change. Not now. Not ever. Their world was small and certain, and I didn't fit in it. Not because I failed, but because I'd outgrown it. I left before dessert. No goodbyes, no explanations. I drove home in silence. The road was dark, the sky clear. My hands on the wheel were steady. Somewhere along the highway, I began thinking about a campaign we were about to pitch. A logistics firm expanding into 4 new cities. We'd just been shortlisted. The client wanted a bold rebrand, something different from their competitors. And an idea came to me, not out of spite, out of purpose. What if we made this campaign about the people behind the movement? What if we told the story of builders who didn't wear hard hats, but vision? What if for once I put my own face on the work? I didn't smile. I just drove. I left without saying goodbye. Not out of bitterness or drama. There was no slammed door, no final look over the shoulder. I simply waited until the group was laughing at another one of Ryan's harmless jabs, made sure no one was looking, and slipped through the side gate. My car was parked in the shade of a large sycamore tree down the block. I walked slowly, quietly, heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome counting down the seconds to the next version of me. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary once I sat down. Not because I was angry, but because I felt something dissolving, like a curtain finally falling on a performance I never auditioned for. I took a deep breath and told myself what I had been avoiding for years. I didn't need their applause. Their acknowledgement wasn't currency anymore. I'd been bankrupt in their system for too long. I needed to stop trading my worth for a nod across a dinner table. When I got home, the first thing I did was take off my shoes and sit on the hardwood floor of my apartment. My living room was a little messy, open laptop on the coffee table, design mock-ups pinned on a corkboard, coffee mugs half full, but it felt like mine. Mine in the way that no room in my parents' house ever had. I looked around and saw progress. Not the kind with ribbons or titles or congratulatory toasts, but real, built-from-scratch progress. I opened my laptop. Notifications blinked in the corner of the screen. Slack messages, client emails, a project timeline update. I clicked into our agency workspace. My team had finished early wireframes for the logistics client we were chasing. They looked sharp, clean. The kind of work that made me proud before anyone else saw it. The kind of work that didn't need permission to exist. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from stress, but from a quiet buzz under my skin. The kind that comes when you know you're about to do something irreversible. I sat at my desk at 1:42 a.m., staring at our client roster. I thought about the logistics pitch, how much they were investing in new markets. I thought about Ryan's company. Their office was in one of the downtown zones the client was targeting. I hadn't planned it, but now it seemed inevitable. I drafted a note to my creative director. Let's go big on this one. I want a human-centered campaign, bold visuals, minimal copy, big statements. Let's spotlight the people driving progress, not just logos or slogans. Let's use real faces. Let's redefine leadership, she replied in 10 minutes. Love it. Who are we casting? I typed, and then paused. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to write me, not out of ego, not even out of vindication, but because I believed in the idea. Because I was a builder too. I just didn't wear a hard hat. My tools were different, but the structures I created, teams, brands, cultures, were real, scalable, profitable, and powerful. So I wrote back, let's start with someone internal, someone who's been in the trenches. I'll go first. I stared at the blinking cursor after hitting send. My throat was dry. My heart was slow but loud. I didn't know what would come next, if the team would question it, if the client would approve it, if the family would ever even notice. But for once, that wasn't the point. The point was that I'd stopped waiting to be seen. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The sunlight was pouring through the blinds, painting pale lines across my floor. I brewed coffee, answered early emails, and slid into a video meeting with the art team. I outlined the vision. They got it instantly. No pushback, no hesitation. We talked mood boards, color palettes, lighting concepts. I sent over a few headshots I had lying around. They asked for updated ones, clean, direct, unfussy. I booked a studio for the next afternoon. No fancy wardrobe, no professional makeup, just me, the way I show up to meetings, the way I show up to build. By the end of the day, we had a rough timeline. If all went well, the campaign would roll out in 6 weeks. The central feature, billboards across 4 cities, starting in Dallas. One of those billboards was scheduled to go up 3 blocks from my brother's office. I didn't plan it out of spite. That location simply made strategic sense. It had high visibility and prime commuter exposure. But when I saw it on the map, I felt that same buzz under my skin. A quiet, centered certainty. I didn't tell anyone. Not the team, not the client, not my friends, and definitely not my family. I just did the work, I kept showing up, and I let the results speak for themselves. The studio was small, tucked between a vintage clothing store and a shuttered diner on a quiet street in East Austin. It didn't look like much from the outside. Faded brick, a scratched black door, a tiny bell that rang when I pushed it open. But inside, the space transformed. White walls, diffuse skylights, a silence so focused it almost hummed. The photographer greeted me with a nod and a clipboard. I had already filled out the intake form online. No makeup artist, no stylist, no assistant. Just me, a plain black blazer, and a half hour of booked time. I had worn that blazer for years through meetings, pitches, last-minute Zoom calls. It wasn't designer, but it fit me like I'd been born into it. Underneath, a simple gray tee. My hair was clean but undone. No jewelry, no lipstick. I wanted to look like who I was at work: collected, alert, direct. I didn't want to pretend to be bigger than the role. I wanted to embody it. The photographer asked what the shots were for, and I told him we were featuring internal leadership as part of a new campaign. I didn't say it was my agency. I didn't say I was the CEO. I didn't say anything about my family or the significance of what we were building. He just nodded and adjusted the lights. The first few clicks of the camera made me self-conscious. I blinked too often. I tilted my head too much. My hands didn't know where to be. Then he said, "Just look into the lens like you're making a decision no one else in the room is brave enough to make." And something inside me shifted. I squared my shoulders. I slowed my breathing. I looked into the lens not as someone trying to be convincing, but as someone who no longer needed to be. I thought about every time someone had told me I was playing CEO. I thought about my father's silent glances, my brother's jokes, my sister's soft pity. I thought about all the years I'd spent designing other people's brands while being invisible in my own story. Click, click, click. We wrapped in 20 minutes. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table and reviewed the proofs on my laptop. Most were good. A few were very good. And then there was one image where I wasn't smiling, wasn't posing, wasn't seeking approval. Just eyes to the lens. Calm, focused, steady. That one stopped me cold. It didn't scream. It didn't beg. It just said, "This is real." That's the one we chose. I emailed it to our creative director, attached with a simple line, "Use this one." The next step was designing the billboard layout. We didn't want text-heavy messaging. The brand we were promoting was built on simplicity and reliability, not flash. We decided on an all-white background, the photograph centered, and in small, bold type beneath my face, built by women who don't ask permission. No agency name, no job title, no hashtags or social handles. The message wasn't about self-promotion. It was about presence. When the mock-up came back from the print vendor, I stared at it for a long time. I wasn't used to seeing myself like this, not polished or cute or composed, but unapologetic. There was no part of me trying to shrink to fit, no anxious tilt to the smile, no softness to earn comfort. Just stillness, strength, space. My name wasn't even on it, but I was all over it. I approved the layout and moved on to logistics. The vendor coordinated with our media buyer to lock down placements in 4 Texas cities. The Dallas location that sat 3 blocks from my brother's firm was one of the first to confirm. My team flagged it in our internal tracker. Downtown Dallas eastbound commuter traffic prime visibility. I didn't tell them about the coincidence. I didn't tell them who worked in that building or who might drive past it every morning with a lukewarm coffee and a head full of assumptions. The production timeline was tight. We had to move fast to meet the client's seasonal window. I coordinated with vendors, finalized print specs, signed off on proofing. It was work I'd done a dozen times before, but never for something like this. Never with my own face as the asset. As the rollout approached, I kept everything quiet. No social teasers, no hints. I didn't even mention it in our team stand-up. It was just another task on the board, another line item in the campaign budget. But inside, I felt it building. The weight of it, the quiet force, not revenge, not even validation, something cleaner. Like coming home to yourself after years of knocking on the wrong doors. 2 days before the installation, the vendor sent confirmation that all materials had shipped. I read the email 3 times, then closed my laptop. I sat in my living room with the lights off and the window open. The night was warm, heavy with distant traffic and the faint hum of sprinklers. I imagined the billboard going up in the early morning hours, a crane lifting my image into place as the city slept. And I wondered not if my family would see it, but what they would feel when they did. Because I knew, this time, they would feel something, even if they never said a word. It started as a whisper, the kind that slips through group chats and lunch tables without announcing itself. I wasn't even the first to know it had gone up. That honor went to Brandon, a web developer I'd worked with on a freelance basis 2 years ago. He messaged me a selfie, taken from across the street, with the billboard behind him and the caption, "I know her." I laughed, sent back a thumbs up, and went about my day. It wasn't until the 3rd message, this one from a college classmate I hadn't spoken to in 6 years, that I realized something was different. "Girl, you're on I-345. You look like a boss." Then a former client tagged me in a blurry Instagram story. No context. Just a drive-by capture of the billboard with my face looming over traffic. Then came another and another. Suddenly I was being mentioned in Facebook groups, in Slack channels, in email threads that somehow found their way back to me. I hadn't posted anything about it. Hadn't told anyone it was happening, not even my closest friends. And yet, the image spread. In a digital world, Analog makes noise. The campaign hadn't even officially launched, but people noticed. Not because I was famous or dramatic or flashy, but because the image was so unapologetically still. In a city built on motion, that kind of presence read as power. I started getting emails. A woman who ran a women's entrepreneurship group in Houston asked if I would be a guest on her podcast. A local university wanted me to come speak to their business school students about leadership in creative industries. A brand strategist from Atlanta asked to feature me in an article called Women Reframing Visibility. But the message that stopped me cold came 2 days later. It was from my cousin Leah, who worked in HR at my brother's company. It was short. Ryan saw the billboard this morning. He didn't say anything, but his face changed. He was quiet all day. That was it. No emojis, no follow-up, just a sentence. I read it over and over. For years, I had tried to make him see me not as the artsy sister, not as the hobbyist, but as a builder in my own right. I had tried through conversation, through accomplishments, through polite proximity. None of it landed. He had always operated from a height he never questioned, never needed to. And now, for the first time, he looked up and I was there. Not in his office, not at his table, but 3 stories high and impossible to ignore. And still, I didn't reach out. I didn't text. I didn't comment. I didn't ask what he thought. Instead, I took my team out to lunch. We sat at a taco spot near our office, and they talked shop client timelines, an upcoming pitch, some issue with print delivery for another campaign. I listened, half there and half somewhere else. Watching them, I realized how much we'd grown. Not in size, though we had, but in alignment. These were people who had bought in not just to the brand, but to the mission. And that mission wasn't visibility. It was credibility, ownership, autonomy. My creative director raised a toast. To seeing your own face in your own work, she said, smiling. Everyone laughed. I did too. But inside, I was thinking about how strange it felt to be seen, not just recognized, but reflected. All those years building mirrors for other people, I had forgotten what it felt like to stand in front of one that didn't distort. Later that evening, I checked the campaign analytics dashboard. Click-through rates were already above average. Brand recall metrics were promising. But it wasn't the data that mattered most to me. It was something quieter. An email from a junior designer I'd never met. She wrote, "I saw your face on the billboard on my way to work. I cried a little. Thank you for existing." I stared at the screen, unsure what to do with that kind of weight. I didn't feel proud. I felt responsible. The next morning, I went for a walk through downtown Dallas before the city fully woke up. I took the long way, looping through Main Street Garden, passing early commuters, joggers, people balancing coffees and phones. Eventually, I turned the corner and saw it again, my billboard. There it was, huge, still, anchored. And I felt something new. Not pride, not validation, peace. I stood across the street and watched as car after car passed by, most drivers not even glancing up. And yet, there it was, undeniable. For a long time, I had been chasing the feeling of being taken seriously. Now I realized I had become someone who didn't need permission to exist, not even from them. The messages didn't come all at once. They never do, not in families like mine. In families like mine, things arrive slowly through side channels and coded language. They show up in the form of half-hearted emojis, clipped phrases, carefully timed check-ins that ask about everything except what they're really about. My mother texted first. It was a photo cropped awkwardly, taken through a car windshield, slightly blurred. My face on the billboard, halfway obscured by glare. Underneath it, just one word. Nice. I stared at it for a full minute before responding. I typed thanks, then deleted it. I tried hope you're well, but that felt like a performance. I ended up saying nothing. I closed the message and moved on with my day. Later that afternoon, my sister Vanessa sent a voice memo. I could tell she was walking wind in the background. Her footsteps muffled. Her tone was light, but something was underneath it. "Hey," she said. "So, saw something kind of cool today. Guess you're famous now, huh?" Then a short laugh. Then a pause. "Anyway, just wanted to say, congrats, I think." Then the message ended. I didn't reply to her either. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to be distant. I just didn't know what they wanted from me anymore. For years, I had begged silently through hard work, through patience, through forced humility to be noticed. Now they noticed. And suddenly, I didn't crave it. It felt hollow, late, like an apology delivered too softly and too far from the scene of the crime. A few days later, my mom called. I let it ring the first time. The second time, I answered. Her voice was cheerful, polite, too polished. She asked how work was going, if I was eating well, if I had time to rest. All the usual questions, offered with the usual avoidance. We danced around it for 5 minutes, small talk. Questions about the weather, about the neighbor's new fence, before she finally brought it up. "I saw the billboard," she said. A pause. "Your father did too." I waited. "He didn't say much," she continued. "But I think he was surprised. It's very big. Your face is very serious." I almost laughed at that, as if the problem was my expression, not the fact that I existed larger than they ever allowed me to be. "Well," she said, after the silence stretched too long, "it's certainly something. We've never had anyone in the family do that." I knew what she meant. We'd had lawyers, teachers, engineers, respectable jobs, clear paths, things people could understand at reunions and explain with a single word. But this, what I had built, wasn't easy to summarize. It didn't fit into their language. It didn't come with a diploma or a pension or a nameplate on a door they could visit. "It's a bit much, don't you think?" she added, her voice light again, almost joking. "I mean, I hope it doesn't make the wrong impression." There it was, the old reflex. To shrink, to soften, to make sure no one got uncomfortable with my size. "I'm proud of you, though," she said quickly, as if patching a leak. I thanked her. I kept my tone even, unbothered. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't tell her how many women had reached out, how many young creatives had said they saw a future in that billboard. I didn't tell her what it meant to me to take up space, because if she didn't already understand, no explanation would land. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, not out of sadness, out of clarity. Their voices would always come like that, low, hesitant, delivered in whispers. They had no language for what I was becoming. Their instincts would always be to caution, to question, to diminish gently. Not because they hated me, but because they feared what they couldn't control. That evening, I got an email from a nonprofit in San Antonio, asking if I would speak at their women's leadership panel. The subject line read, "Your billboard gave us chills." I accepted without hesitation. I didn't need to run it by anyone. I didn't need approval whispered through closed doors. The difference between who I was and who I had become wasn't just in the work. It was in the silence, in what I no longer felt compelled to answer, in what I could now leave unsaid. And still, even through the quiet, the world had heard me. The message came on a Thursday morning. A short text from my father, just 3 words. "Coffee this weekend?" No punctuation, no context. He didn't call, didn't follow up, didn't add a time or place. Just the question, dangling like a hook in the water, waiting to see if I'd bite. For a full minute, I stared at the screen, unmoving. It wasn't like him to reach out first. He preferred to be at the center, not the one extending the invitation. Something had shifted. Whether it was the billboard or the silence that followed, I didn't know. But it had moved him enough to ask for a meeting. I waited an hour before I answered. Saturday, 9 a.m., Café Valor. I chose a place close to my office, neutral ground. A quiet spot with warm lighting, good espresso, and tables tucked far enough apart for privacy. He replied within minutes. "See you then." The night before, I couldn't sleep. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't settle. I rehearsed possible conversations. imagined how he might open, whether he'd deflect or go straight in. I reminded myself not to expect too much. Just a conversation, not closure, not redemption. Saturday morning, I got there 10 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a small corner table near the window. The sun was just beginning to stretch across the pavement outside. I sipped slowly, watching people pass joggers, dog walkers, couples in casual weekend uniforms. At exactly 9:01, my father walked in. He was dressed as always, khakis, a navy windbreaker, loafers that creaked faintly when he walked. He scanned the room, saw me, gave a nod, and made his way over. No hug. Just a quiet good morning as he pulled out the chair across from me. He didn't order anything, just sat with his hands folded on the table like this was a business meeting. For a moment, we both said nothing. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been seeing your face a lot lately," he said. It wasn't a joke, but it wasn't heavy either. More like a fact he was struggling to process. "Downtown, twice on my way to work." I nodded. "It's impressive," he added. Another silence. I waited. He shifted in his seat. "I didn't realize how big your company had gotten." That word realize hung in the air like a guilty whisper. I wanted to ask what he thought I'd been doing all this time, what he thought those late nights and missed holidays were about. But I didn't. I just sipped my coffee. He looked around the cafe, eyes resting briefly on the art prints along the walls, the glass display of pastries, the woman in the corner typing furiously on her laptop. Then he looked back at me. "I've been thinking," he said. "We've been having some trouble with our internal messaging. HR's been a mess since Marcia left. Our branding is outdated. The younger hires don't even know our values." I blinked once, slowly. He hesitated, then said, "Maybe you and your team could take a look, see what could be improved." I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or let the silence speak for me. He wasn't saying it out of admiration. He was asking because he needed help. Because the man who once told me marketing was just fluff now realized his business couldn't function without it. And he had come, hat in hand, though he didn't know how to hold it. I nodded once. "Submit a request through our website," I said. His face twitched slightly, not offense, more like confusion. "Through the website?" "That's how all clients begin," I said evenly. "Keeps the process clean." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he nodded. "All right." We sat in that cafe for 20 more minutes. He asked about our team size, how many clients we managed, whether we had plans to expand. I answered his questions the same way I would any prospective client: direct, concise, professional. When we finished, he stood and reached for his jacket. "It's good to see you," he said. I gave him a small smile. "You too." He walked out first. I stayed behind, finished the last of my coffee, and watched through the window as he got into his car and drove away. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a transaction. But there was something clean about that, honest, in a way our conversations had never been before. No performance, no pretending, just two people who finally met on level ground, because the old hierarchy had collapsed under the weight of reality. He would go home and fill out the contact form. My team would review it like any other lead. If the scope fit, we'd send a proposal. If it didn't, we'd decline. For the first time, my father wasn't a father in my story. He was just another name in the inbox. The contact form came in on a Tuesday. Submitted at 6:43 a.m. early, precise, like most things my father did. No name in the body of the message, just a request. Internal brand alignment, employee communication, possible rework of mission and values copy. The company was listed simply as Carver Industrial Group. Though I knew exactly who they were, my team flagged it like any other inbound lead. It landed in our CRM, was auto-categorized, and assigned a pipeline tag. Prospect, mid-sized business, legacy brand. I didn't touch it. I didn't comment or intervene. I let the system work. 2 days later, our client success coordinator reached out with a discovery call invite. She didn't know she was emailing my father. She greeted him with the same warm, efficient professionalism she used for everyone. "Hi, Thomas. Thanks for reaching out. We'd love to learn more about your goals." I watched it all unfold from the back end of our project tracker, like someone reading a case study they already knew the ending to. The call happened that Friday. I wasn't on it. I had specifically instructed the team not to loop me in unless the project moved to proposal stage. I didn't want to cloud the process. If we were going to work with them, we'd do it cleanly. Not because I owed him something, or because he was trying to make amends in the language he understood best: contracts and deliverables. My junior strategist ran point. She messaged afterward. "Nice guy. Bit formal. Gave me retired military vibes. Said they're losing younger hires and want to modernize without losing their soul." I smiled at that. Losing their soul was the kind of thing he would say grand, slightly melodramatic, but rooted in fear. Not fear of failure, but of irrelevance. The proposal went out the next Tuesday. 3 tiers, clearly priced. No discounts, no family notes, no nudges. Just deliverables, timelines, KPIs. Our usual process. He accepted Tier 2. Mid-range, strategic workshops, internal survey, brand guide light, 3-month rollout. He signed the contract digitally. No note attached. We assigned the project to a team of 4. None of them had any personal history with Carver Industrial. Our project manager, Anna, handled onboarding. She sent over the timeline, assets request, and scheduled the kickoff. I stayed in the background, watching documents populate in the shared folder. Outdated brand statements, clunky PowerPoints from HR, scanned copies of value statements from 2008. The audit was brutal. Their brand voice was inconsistent. Internal culture documents read like lecture notes. The employee welcome kit included a CD-ROM. Anna's summary was diplomatic but clear. They need a full internal culture refresh. Mission and values aren't aligning with how the younger staff experience leadership. There's also a weird fixation on legacy messaging, lots of language about tradition, longevity, the old way. They're proud, but stuck. She didn't know she was describing the very framework I'd grown up under. I watched from a distance as my team did what they do best. Dissected, translated, restructured. They crafted messaging that honored history but didn't chain the future to it. They created a bridge one my father had never been able to build between generations. Weeks passed. Deliverables were met. Feedback loops cycled. The tone of communication from my father shifted. At first, formal, then inquisitive, then deferential, not to me, to them. He referred to Anna by name. He asked for her thoughts. He implemented changes without pushing back. He requested to expand the engagement to include onboarding redesign and internal comm strategy. They never knew who he was to me. They just knew him as Tom from Carver. One afternoon, while reviewing slide drafts for their new value pillars, I found myself pausing. One of the values had been rewritten: ownership through action. I stared at it. Simple, clear, familiar. We had used a similar phrase in our own brand manifesto 2 years ago. I'd written it myself. Ownership through action. That was what this was, wasn't it? Not a performance. Not a stage play where I got to show them all. Just this. A clean system. Clear terms. Work that stood on its own. A few weeks later, they launched their internal brand campaign. Not flashy, not public. But it meant something. I knew what it meant to them. I knew what it meant to him. Still, I didn't step in. I didn't show up to the internal presentation, though I was invited by the team. I told them I had a scheduling conflict. It wasn't about false modesty. It was about boundaries. My father sent an email after the rollout. Subject line, "Thank you." The body was short. "Melissa, I don't know what I expected when I reached out, but what your team did exceeded anything I imagined. They were professional, sharp, respectful, and generous with their time. Your company is something special. You've built something real. Congratulations, that was all. No emotion, no family talk, no revisionist history. Just a sentence I never thought I'd see in black and white. You've built something real. I forwarded the email to Anna and the rest of the team with a smiley face and a thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. They didn't need to know the backstory. The system had worked. It was a Tuesday morning, unseasonably cold for Dallas. I had bundled myself in a thick coat and scarf, clutching a coffee that was rapidly losing its heat, my fingers stiff from the bite in the air. I wasn't supposed to be downtown that day. One of our clients had asked for an in-person check-in before launching their holiday campaign, and since the account manager had called in sick, I decided to go myself. No part of me expected what was about to happen. I parked 3 blocks from the client's office and started walking. I passed storefronts just beginning to stir, window blinds lifting, chairs scraping across tile floors, the smell of cinnamon rolls and sanitizer mixing in the air. My heels clicked against the sidewalk with steady rhythm. I wasn't thinking about much, just rehearsing deliverables in my head and mentally sorting the rest of my day. And then I turned the corner. There it was, looming above me on the side of the building, tall and silent, my billboard. The one from the logistics campaign, the one with my face, expression neutral but resolute, and that line underneath, built by women who don't ask permission. It had been up for a few weeks now, but I hadn't come to see it in person since the install. Something about doing so felt indulgent, too pointed. But that morning, it felt like fate had pulled me back to that very sidewalk. I slowed down, letting my eyes adjust to the full scale of it. It was surreal every time seeing yourself from a distance, projected and oversized, abstracted into marketing language. Not a person anymore, but an idea, a message, a mirror for someone else's ambition. I let out a breath, both proud and slightly uneasy, still not entirely used to the visibility I'd once craved so desperately. And then I saw him. My father was standing across the street. At first, I wasn't entirely sure it was him. He was in his usual navy jacket, gray slacks, black leather gloves he always wore too early in the season. He had one hand in his coat pocket and the other loosely at his side. He wasn't moving, wasn't on his phone, wasn't in a hurry like everyone else. Just standing still, looking up, looking at me. Not the me walking down the street, but the one 40 feet above him. I froze. He hadn't seen me yet. His eyes were fixed on the billboard, his mouth pressed into a tight line, the way it always was when he was trying to process something he couldn't quite grasp. He looked smaller than usual, diminished by the enormity of the image above him. He was still, and yet something about him vibrated with discomfort or awe or confusion I couldn't tell. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure whether to say something, whether to interrupt whatever moment he was having. Part of me wanted to disappear into the crowd, to leave him alone with the confrontation he clearly hadn't expected. But another part of me, quieter, stronger, stayed rooted. I took a step forward, and that small motion caught his attention. His head turned slowly. Our eyes met. It was only a second, maybe 2, but it stretched. I didn't smile. Neither did he. He looked at me like I was a puzzle he'd never solved, like the edges had always been right in front of him, but he had forced the wrong pieces together for too long. And now, seeing me really seeing me, he realized how far off the picture had always been. I could see the questions forming in his face. When did she build all this? How did I miss it? Was I wrong? But he didn't speak. He just nodded once, the kind of nod you give a stranger when you pass them on the street and don't know what else to do. I gave a small nod back, nothing more. Then he turned and walked away. No words, no explanation, no closure. Just the sound of his shoes on concrete, fading with each step. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the spot where he had stood. I could feel my heart pounding, not with adrenaline, but with something heavier finality, maybe. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a quiet settling, a chapter closing not with a bang, but with a breath. I turned and walked in the opposite direction. I didn't look back. I didn't text him afterward. I didn't bring it up in any conversation. Because that moment, as strange and anticlimactic as it may have seemed, was enough. He saw me. Not in the way I once begged for. Not in the small, polite, patronizing glances I had learned to accept. But really clearly for what I had built, for what I had become. He stood at the base of something I had created, and for the first time, I didn't feel small next to him. I felt solid, tall, unapologetically mine. The award notification came via email, buried somewhere between a calendar invite for an internal branding workshop and a vendor invoice. At first, I almost deleted it. The subject line felt generic. Congratulations, you've been selected. The kind of thing that screamed spam or marketing. But something made me click, and there it was. A message from the Texas Small Business Association. Ray Creative had been named one of the top 10 emerging agencies in the state. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the catch, but it was real. Our work, our team, our impact. It had reached people I hadn't even realized were watching. They wanted to feature us at their annual summit in Austin. A short acceptance speech, a highlight reel, an interview for their newsletter. I said yes, of course. Not because I needed the validation, but because I had learned that visibility was leverage, not for ego, for growth. We prepared a simple presentation. No fluff, no filler. Just our process, our principles, a few before and afters, and a slide titled, "What Happens When You Stop Asking for Permission?" I let my creative director deliver the main remarks, while I stood slightly to the side, watching the room. Mostly local entrepreneurs, some agency heads, a few reporters. They clapped at all the right moments, nodded along. But I wasn't watching them for approval. I was watching to see who really saw us, who understood what it meant to build a brand from silence. After the event, someone from Austin Business Weekly reached out for an interview. A 20-minute call turned into a feature article. They asked about the origins of the company, the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated industry, how we'd grown so fast without external funding. I answered everything clearly, calmly, without dressing it up. When the article ran, the headline wasn't about me, it was about the work. How a quiet agency changed the language of Texas branding. That meant more than my name ever could. A few days later, we were invited to join a panel on digital storytelling at SXSW. Then came the invitation to collaborate with a nonprofit rebranding campaign in New Orleans. The pipeline grew not just in size, but in weight. Legacy clients, national eyes. My inbox became a place of opportunity, not requests for justification. And yet, something strange happened at home. My name, once rarely spoken, once treated like a placeholder for someone still finding her way, began to come up in family circles. Vanessa told me during one call that Mom had started mentioning my work when talking to her friends at church. She told someone you were doing something with Google. I think she means the summit. Ryan, for his part, stayed silent. I never expected him to say anything, but a mutual acquaintance told me his tone had changed, that he'd referred to me not mockingly, not dismissively as my sister, the branding expert. It wasn't much, but it was enough to mark a shift. I didn't need their words anymore, but I watched with quiet fascination how the power of my work had slowly begun to rewrite the narrative they'd once controlled. We were now being cited in industry blogs. My team was getting asked to guest on design podcasts. One of our interns got poached by a major tech firm after showcasing the projects she'd done with us. I felt proud not in the way that demanded applause, but in the quiet, grounded way you feel when you know you're building something that will outlast your own name. Because that's what it had become. Bigger than me, bigger than Melissa Carver. Ray Creative was no longer Melissa's little company. It was a machine, a movement, an identity system with its own weight, its own voice, its own reach. I had done the hard thing. I had stepped out of the center and let the work lead. Some days, I barely appeared in meetings. My team ran them flawlessly. Other days, I was deep in the trenches reviewing copy, debating color schemes, pushing timelines. But every day I felt the same sense of clarity. This isn't about being seen. This is about building something worth looking at. And yet, despite all the momentum, the biggest moment came from something unplanned. A client, one of the logistics firms from our earliest campaigns, sent me a photo. It was taken in their new headquarters. In the background was a framed print of our billboard, the one with my face. We kept it, the email said. It reminds us what leadership looks like when it's quiet, focused, and undeniable. I stared at the photo for a long time. That face was still me, but it no longer felt like it needed to fight to exist. I closed the email and opened a new document, not to write a reply, but to start outlining our next expansion plan. A third office, possibly out of state, because the name they once barely acknowledged had done what they never expected. It had become more than a name. It had become a force. The invitation arrived in the mail, printed on ivory cardstock with elegant, cursive lettering. Carver Family Holiday Gala, it read. Below that, the date, the time, the venue, a banquet hall on the north side of town. RSVP requested. The envelope was addressed to Ms. Melissa Carver. No note inside, no signature, just the formality of inclusion, polished and impersonal. It sat on my desk for 3 days before I even acknowledged it. I wasn't angry, just indifferent. After everything, being invited no longer felt like a door opening, it felt like a performance resuming, a script I had long since abandoned. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't know if I wanted to go. My instinct was to decline quietly, skip the whole affair, keep moving forward. But something about the timing gave me pause. It wasn't just a holiday gathering, it was the first formal family event since the billboard, since the rebrand, since the emails and the nods, and the email from my father thanking me for my team's work. Something about the stillness inside me made me curious, not hopeful. I didn't want to be embraced. I just wanted to see if I could stand in that room and feel nothing, no ache, no expectation, just presence. The night of the event, I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. I didn't want to be early, didn't want to wait around awkwardly while people filtered in. The banquet hall was tastefully decorated, all silver and navy and sprigs of pine. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The smell of catered roast chicken and cinnamon lingered beneath the floral arrangements. I wore a charcoal pantsuit, clean lines, no embellishments paired with a pair of small silver earrings. Nothing about my appearance screamed attention, but I knew I carried it anyway. People noticed me. I could feel it as I walked through the room. Not in the wide-eyed, head-turning kind of way, but in glances, in soft murmurs, in the way conversations briefly paused as I passed by. Cousins I hadn't seen in years nodded at me with unfamiliar respect. Aunt Marla, who once told me, "You're always better behind the scenes," gave me a long, appraising look and said, "You look like a woman who runs something." I smiled and thanked her, then moved on. I found my seat at the assigned table near the middle of the room next to Ryan and his wife. He looked up as I approached, startled for just a moment, then recovered. "Hey," he said, shifting in his chair. I nodded back. We didn't hug, we didn't small talk, just a mutual acknowledgement of each other's existence. I sat down, folded my napkin into my lap, and poured myself a glass of water. The evening unfolded as these things always did, slow, polite, full of safe conversation. I didn't try to insert myself, but I also didn't recede. When someone asked me what I did, I answered plainly. When someone complimented the campaign they'd seen on a billboard downtown, I confirmed it was ours. When Ryan's wife asked how many employees we had now, I told her 26 full-time, and about a dozen rotating contractors. She blinked, nodded slowly, and said, "That's a lot." It was. There was a moment during the meal when my father got up to give a toast. He stood at the head of the room, glass in hand, voice steady. He spoke about family, about legacy, about how proud he was of what everyone had built this year. He mentioned Ryan's firm landing a major contract. He mentioned Vanessa's new curriculum initiative at her school. And then he paused. And Melissa, he said. I didn't move. I've said before that I didn't always understand what she was building, he continued. But I've come to learn that some things don't need to be understood to be respected. She's created something powerful, something real, and I'm proud of her. No applause followed. No gasps. Just a soft, respectful silence, broken by the gentle clink of a fork against a glass. That was enough. After dinner, people mingled. I stayed near the back of the room, talking to a few of the younger cousins who asked me about marketing, about how I'd started, about what to study. I told them what I wish someone had told me years ago. Build slow. Build honest. Don't ask for seats. Bring your own chair. I left early. No long goodbyes. Just a few nods, a few quiet thanks, a few hesitant smiles. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and crisp. I stood still for a moment, looking up at the stars muted by city light. I felt no triumph, no vindication, just peace. This wasn't closure. It was arrival, not at their table, not in their story, but in my own. My place wasn't given. It was built. It happened on a plane. I was flying back from a conference in Chicago, one of those polished events with lanyards and branded notebooks and panel discussions that felt both inspiring and exhausting. I had been invited to speak on a topic that used to feel radical and now felt routine. Building identity in the absence of permission. The talk had gone well. People clapped. Strangers came up afterward, thanked me, told me their own stories about feeling invisible at the tables where decisions were made. I smiled, I nodded, I answered questions. But the moment I walked off stage, I felt it, that quiet tug of emptiness that always followed visibility. Like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. The flight was nearly empty, a late one, barely 20 passengers. I boarded early, took the window seat, and pulled out my laptop, but didn't open it. I just sat, staring at my own reflection in the oval glass. No makeup left. Hair tied back. Just a face. Not a statement. Not a brand. Just a face. Sometime after takeoff, a woman slid into the seat across the aisle from me. She looked about 30, wearing a sweatshirt that said Austin Made in fading script. She smiled politely and offered a nod. I returned it. We didn't speak. Not then. Half an hour into the flight attendant came by with snacks. As I reached for a bottle of water, the woman leaned toward me slightly. Sorry, she said, her voice low. This is going to sound strange, but are you the woman from that billboard downtown? The one with the quote about not asking for permission? I turned toward her, caught off guard, then nodded slowly. She smiled, but not like someone meeting a celebrity. It was something else. Recognition. Resonance. I see it every morning on my way to work, she said. I don't know, it's quiet, but it makes me feel different, like I don't have to prove anything to show up. I didn't know what to say to that. I never really did. She looked down, embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. I just wanted to say thank you. I think a lot of us needed to see that. And just like that, she turned back toward her book. I stared at the seat in front of me for a long time, not because I was overwhelmed, but because something had finally settled. All those years I had spent trying to be seen, trying to be loud enough to echo in rooms where I was never invited. Those days felt so far away now, and yet the echo was still traveling, not because I shouted, but because I stood still. That billboard had no name on it, no credentials, no website. Just a face and a sentence. And it moved people. Not because it demanded attention, but because it didn't. Later, as the plane began its descent, I closed my eyes and thought back to the early days, to the nights I spent hunched over my laptop, cobbling together websites for clients who couldn't afford full rates, to the rejections, the dismissals, the casual cruelty of being underestimated. I thought about the family dinners, the polite laughter, the way Ryan once joked I made digital flyers like it was a hobby. I thought about how I used to shrink myself to fit inside their understanding, and then I thought about what I had built. Not just an agency, not just a brand, a space, a system, a truth, one that didn't require anyone's approval. A few weeks later, I walked into our office lobby on a quiet Monday morning. The receptionist waved, handed me a fresh folder with onboarding docs for a new hire. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. On the landing, there's a large frame we rotate every quarter, a photo, a quote, a moment that represents where we are as a company. This time, they had chosen something new. It was the billboard image. But this time, the quote beneath it had changed. It read, "She built what they said didn't count." I stood in front of it for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. Because I was no longer chasing the moment I'd be taken seriously. Because I had become something even quieter, something steadier. I was no longer a daughter trying to earn her place at the table. I was just a face, a woman, a builder. And that was enough.